The first thing that hit you when you walked into Mark and Linda's house was the silence. It wasn't a peaceful quiet. It was a heavy, suffocating thing, the kind that absorbs all other sound. It clung to the furniture and pooled in the corners, thick with dust motes dancing in the slivers of afternoon light. 2 months. It had been 2 months since the phone call that had cleaved my life in two, and the silence in this house was the sound of the world holding its breath. Mark was my brother, my only family since our parents died when I was just a kid. He'd raised me, coached my softball teams, and threatened my high school prom date with the whole 9 yards of big brother intimidation. And Linda? Linda had been the sun he orbited. She was all vibrant energy and infectious laughter, a woman whose honey-colored hair seemed to catch the light even in a dim room and whose green eyes sparkled with a perpetual amusement at the world. Now that light was gone. She was a ghost in her own home, a pale, fragile version of the woman I'd known. She drifted from room to room, her movements slow and aimless. Her once bright hair was dull and usually pulled back in a messy knot, and her eyes, when they met mine, were like stormy gray seas. She barely ate, and I wasn't sure she slept. My own grief was a raw, hollowed-out cavern in my chest. Some mornings, it was so immense I could hardly breathe around it. But my pain felt secondary, a luxury I couldn't afford. My one anchoring thought was Linda. Mark had loved her more than anything. He would have expected me to take care of her. So I packed a bag, left my tiny apartment, and moved into their guest room, determined to stand between her and the abyss that was beckoning. I couldn't lose her, too. The silence had a routine. I'd wake up, find Linda staring out the kitchen window with an untouched mug of coffee, and I'd make myself a bowl of cereal we'd both pretend she might share. The hours would stretch, punctuated only by the hum of the refrigerator or the sigh of the house settling. I knew I had to do something, anything to break the spell. I remembered Mark once telling me, with a goofy, lovesick grin, that he'd won Linda over with his surprisingly perfect French toast. It was her favorite. I, on the other hand, considered successfully boiling water a culinary triumph. But desperation makes you bold. One morning, I crept into the kitchen while she was still in bed. I pulled up a recipe on my phone, my movements clumsy and loud in the quiet house. I cracked eggs, splashing more on the counter than in the bowl. I soaked the bread for too long, turning it into a soggy mess. The butter sizzled and then burned in the pan, sending up a plume of acrid smoke that made my eyes water. The result was 2 pieces of bread, blackened on the outside and suspiciously raw in the middle. It was a disaster. Still, I put them on a plate, added a lonely-looking strawberry, and carried it into the living room where Linda was curled on the sofa, wrapped in one of Mark's old sweaters. I set the plate on the coffee table in front of her. "Breakfast is served," I said, my voice trying for a lightness I didn't feel. She looked from the charred offering to my face, taking in my flour-dusted cheek and smoke-scented hair. A flicker of something moved in her expression. Her lips, which I hadn't seen do anything but press into a thin line for weeks, twitched. And then it came, a small, rusty sound, like a hinge being forced open after years of disuse. A laugh. It was barely a whisper of a sound, but it was there. She looked at the toast. "It's awful," she said, her voice hoarse. "A masterpiece of culinary failure," I agreed, a genuine smile breaking through my own exhaustion.
She didn't eat it.
But she drank a few sips of the orange juice I brought her, and for the first time in a long time, the silence in the room felt a little less heavy. That little spark of a laugh became my mission. I started cooking in earnest, my laptop propped on the counter, my brow furrowed in concentration as I followed celebrity chefs on YouTube. There were more failures, soupy casseroles and rubbery chicken, but slowly, things started to become edible. I'd make dinner, and Linda would sit at the table with me, sometimes only pushing food around her plate, but she was there. She was present. I started cleaning the house, too. Not to erase Mark, but to let some air back in. I'd put on music, quiet acoustic stuff, and dust the shelves, polish the wood floors, and wash the windows until the sun streamed in without a filter of grime. I was tending to the house the way I was trying to tend to her, with gentle, consistent care. The hardest day was when I decided to tackle Mark's closet. His clothes still hung there, smelling of him, of his soap and his cologne. It was an avalanche of grief waiting to happen. I started to pull out his shirts, intending to box them up, when I felt her presence in the doorway. She didn't say anything, just stood and watched me. I held up one of his favorite flannel shirts. "I can stop," I said softly. She shook her head, her eyes glassy. She walked over and took the shirt from me, her fingers tracing the worn fabric. She brought it to her face and inhaled deeply, her eyes closing. I stood perfectly still, giving her the moment. Then, she folded it neatly and placed it in the box I'd set on the floor. Together, in silence, we packed away the remnants of his life, a silent team, united in our loss. Halfway through, I found a tattered envelope tucked in the pocket of his old varsity jacket, Mark's handwriting, addressed to my two favorite people. Inside, he'd scribbled a note dated 6 months before his death. "If anything ever happens to me, look out for each other. You're the only family we have left, and love's not about letting grief trap you. It's about letting it bind you closer." Linda read it through tears, her hand squeezing mine tight. That note hung in the air between us, a silent directive we hadn't known we'd been following. The house was starting to feel less like a tomb and more like a quiet sanctuary. One rainy afternoon, I was trying to organize the built-in bookshelves in Mark's office when my hand brushed against a heavy, leather-bound album. "College," I smiled, pulling it from the shelf and settling onto the plush rug. A few minutes later, Linda appeared in the doorway, drawn by the quiet rustle of turning pages. I patted the space next to me, an open invitation. She hesitated for only a second before sinking to the floor beside me, close enough that our shoulders almost touched. We didn't talk much. There was no need. The pictures told the story. There was Mark, impossibly young with a terrible haircut, his arms slung around a beaming Linda. There was a picture of the three of us at a football game, my face painted with school colors, yelling at the camera while they laughed in the background. I pointed to one of Mark trying to skateboard, his limbs all akimbo just before a fall. "He was so bad at that," Linda whispered, a real smile gracing her lips. "He tried for weeks to impress me." "It worked, though," I said gently. "Yeah," she breathed, her smile turning wistful. "It worked." We sat there for over an hour, two people sifting through the architecture of our shared past. The grief was still there, a soft, melancholy note under the surface, but it was mingled with a warmth that felt like coming home. We weren't just a sister-in-law and a brother's widow anymore. We were the sole members of a club no one wants to join, the keepers of Mark's memory. And in that shared duty, our own bond was being quietly reforged. The seasons turned, bleeding the last of summer into the crisp gold of autumn. The change outside was mirrored by a change within the walls of our quiet house. The silence was no longer heavy, it was comfortable. It was the easy quiet of two people who understood each other without words. Laughter became a regular guest. It started with small things like when I tripped over the rug or when she pointed out I had a smudge of chocolate on my nose. We'd sit on the couch in the evenings, bickering playfully over the remote, and it felt normal. It felt like life. My focus began to shift in ways that unsettled me. I found myself noticing her. The way she'd furrow her brow when absorbed in a book, or how she'd tuck a strand of her now lustrous hair behind her ear. She was beautiful, of course. I had always known that. But this was different. I wasn't just seeing Mark's wife. I was seeing Linda, her resilience, her kindness, the way she'd hum off-key while watering plants. The sight of her genuine, full-faced smile could make my breath catch in my throat. One evening, we were washing dishes together. She was washing and I was drying. I reached for a plate at the same time she turned, and our hands brushed. A simple, accidental touch. But a current, warm and startling, shot up my arm. Our eyes met for a fraction of a second too long. I saw a flicker of something in their green depths. Confusion, maybe? Surprise? Then she looked away, her cheeks faintly flushed, and the moment was gone. But it wasn't. It lingered in the air between us, a new and unspoken question. The porch swing had become our place. Most evenings after dinner, we'd end up out there, wrapped in blankets against the autumn chill, watching the sky fade from bruised purple to inky black. The gentle, rhythmic creak of the chains was the only sound, a soothing counterpoint to the chirping of crickets. That night, the air was particularly still. A harvest moon hung low and heavy in the sky, bathing the yard in a silvery glow. We'd been sitting in comfortable silence for a while when Linda started talking about her childhood, about the farm she grew up on, and the summers she spent chasing fireflies. Her voice was soft, melodic, and I was completely captivated. She turned to look at me, a small, nostalgic smile on her lips, and the moonlight caught in her eyes, making them shine. In that instant, the carefully constructed walls I'd built around my heart crumbled. All the months of shared grief, of quiet care, of growing affection, it all coalesced into a single, overwhelming wave of emotion. It wasn't rational. It wasn't thought out. It was pure, undeniable impulse. Before I could second-guess it, before the voice of reason could scream Mark's name, I leaned in and pressed my lips to hers. The world stopped for one, single, crystalline second. Her lips were soft, hesitant. Then it shattered. She stiffened, a sharp intake of breath, and then her hands were on my shoulders, pushing me away. Not violently, but with the frantic strength of pure shock. I pulled back, my heart hammering against my ribs. I saw her face, the confusion and a dawning horror twisting her features. She stared at me, her mouth slightly agape, as if she couldn't comprehend what had just happened. Then, without a word, she scrambled off the swing and fled, the screen door slamming shut behind her, leaving me alone in the cold, silent moonlight. The slam of the screen door echoed in a silence that was 1,000 times worse than before. It was a jagged, angry quiet, filled with the accusation of my own transgression. I spent the night on the couch, replaying that one, reckless moment over and over. Shame and regret were a bitter taste in my mouth. I hadn't just crossed a line. I had dynamited it. The next day was an exercise in torment. We moved through the house like ghosts who couldn't bear to look at each other. Every creak of the floorboards was an indictment. I made coffee. She didn't drink. She stayed in her room until I left for a walk. The space I had so carefully filled with warmth and life was now a cold, empty vacuum. I knew I couldn't let it fester. Hiding wouldn't fix what I had broken. That evening, I found her in the backyard, compulsively weeding a flower bed that didn't need it, her back rigid. I stood a few feet away, my hands shoved in my pockets. Linda. She didn't turn around. Don't. I have to, I said, my voice steadier than I felt. I am so sorry for what I did. It was impulsive and unfair to you. And I trailed off, searching for the right words, and realized there were no right words. Only the truth. It happened because I'm in love with you. The words hung in the cool evening air, stark and undeniable. She finally stopped pulling at the weeds and slowly rose to her feet, turning to face me. Her face was pale, her eyes filled with a storm of emotions I couldn't begin to decipher. There was hurt, yes, and confusion. But there wasn't the disgust I had braced myself for. There was just a profound, heartbreaking turmoil. How could you, she whispered, her voice cracking. He was your brother. I know, I said, the cavern in my own chest aching. I know. But Mark's note, he wanted us to hold on to each other. This isn't a betrayal. It's trying to honor him by not being alone. She didn't leave. In some ways, that felt like a bigger miracle than if she had forgiven me on the spot. But a chasm had opened between us, vast and cold. She started sleeping in the guest room, ceding the master bedroom we had once shared as a space of comfort. Our conversations were reduced to stilted necessities. Did you get milk? Or I'm going for a run. I gave her the space she so clearly needed. I stopped trying to fill the silence, instead letting it sit, a testament to the mess I'd made. I continued my routines, cooking, cleaning, existing a quiet, constant presence that asked for nothing. It was a penitence of sorts. I was showing her, through my actions, that my care for her wasn't conditional on her returning my feelings. It was just there. Slowly, I began to notice her watching me. When I was cooking, I'd catch her gaze from the other room. When I was reading on the couch, I'd look up and find her eyes on me, a thoughtful, unreadable expression on her face. She was processing, reevaluating everything that had passed between us, not through the lens of sisterly affection, but through the new, complicated light of my confession. One Saturday, about 3 weeks after my disastrous admission, I was on a stepladder, trying to change a burnt-out light bulb in the high-ceilinged entryway. The bulb was stuck, and I was muttering in frustration. "You need to turn it harder to the left," a quiet voice said from below. I looked down. Linda was standing there, her arms crossed, a faint, almost imperceptible smile on her face. "Thanks," I grunted, giving the bulb another twist. It came loose. It was a small thing, a trivial interaction. But it was the first time she had initiated a conversation that wasn't about household logistics. It was a crack in the ice. A tiny, fragile sign that maybe, just maybe, I hadn't destroyed everything. The truce between us was fragile, but it held. We started talking again, little by little. We went back to watching movies on the couch, though now a respectable cushion's width of space separated us. The tension was still there, a low hum beneath the surface of our lives, but it was no longer hostile. It was uncertain. One evening, the grief came out of nowhere, as it sometimes did. A song came on the radio, one of Mark's favorites. I saw Linda's posture change, her shoulders slump. I felt my own throat tighten. We both sat there, lost in our own private worlds of memory, the living room thick with the presence of the man who wasn't there. I felt a tear escape, tracing a cool path down my cheek. I didn't bother to wipe it away. What was the point? The sadness was a part of me now. I was so focused on the ache in my chest that I didn't notice she'd moved until she was there. She didn't sit beside me. Instead, she knelt on the rug in front of my armchair. She looked at me for a long moment, her green eyes searching mine. Then, without a word, she reached out and gently took my hand, her fingers lacing through mine. Her touch was warm, steady. It wasn't a gesture of passion or romance. It was something deeper. It was an acknowledgement of everything, the pain, the confusion, the shared loss, and the strange, unexpected thing that had grown in its place. She didn't say, "I love you." She didn't have to. In that quiet, deliberate action, I understood. She was choosing this. She was choosing me. She was accepting that our path forward was a new one we would have to navigate together. A month later, we found ourselves back on the porch swing, the same harvest moon hanging overhead. The air was crisp, and I'd brought out 2 mugs of hot cocoa. We sat in silence for a while, until Linda turned to me. "I've been thinking about Mark's note," she said softly.
He was right.
Grief shouldn't trap us. Before I could respond, she leaned in, her forehead resting against mine for a beat, and then she kissed me. It was gentle, tentative, a quiet promise rather than a reckless impulse. This time, there was no pushing away, only the soft press of her lips, a silent yes to the uncertain future ahead. Our life didn't magically become easy. There were no grand declarations, no cinematic moments. Our new beginning was built of small, quiet things. It was in the way she started sitting next to me on the couch again, closing the gap. It was in the soft smile she'd give me over her morning coffee. It was in the comfortable way our hands would find each other when we went for a walk. We were 2 people redefined by loss, learning how to love in the shadow of a memory. Mark was still with us, not as a ghost between us, but as the foundation we were built upon. Our love for him was the common ground from which this new, fragile thing had grown. Some people might never understand it. They might see it as a betrayal. But we knew the truth. It was a testament to the depth of his impact on our lives, a strange and beautiful legacy. One evening, standing on the porch, we watched the sun dip below the horizon, painting the sky in fiery strokes of orange and pink. The swing was still. We simply stood side by side, her shoulder pressed against mine, a quiet point of contact in the vastness of the world. Her presence was a comfort, a solid and unwavering warmth. The future was a blank page. We didn't know what we would write on it, what challenges we would face, or where this path would ultimately lead. But as I looked at her, at the quiet strength in her profile silhouetted against the fading light, I knew one thing for certain. We would face it together. The silence was no longer empty. It was filled with a quiet, resilient hope. It was filled with us,